Hi, Chris. Welcome to Founders Tales. Do you want to give everybody a quick introduction to yourself and your company, Irnerius?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm Christopher Grillo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Irnerius. We're a small edtech startup here in Boston. We're helping parents and students with the college and financial aid application process, aggregating data from more than a dozen different sources and data sets to help them make more informed decisions and hopefully have better outcomes for the students. My background is more than 20 years in higher education, 15 years at Boston College. I'm finishing up my PhD in higher education, focused on behavioral economics and decision making. My studies on parent plus loan borrowing and the decision making around that and outcomes. I have an MBA from Boston College and a master's in higher education from USC. And really be happy to be working with an excellent team to try and solve this kind of critical problem and this important early decision that students are making in their lives.
Yeah. Okay. And this might be a fairly, obvious question given what you've just shared, but what was the problem that first sparked your idea for the business?
Yeah, so that's a great question because there were a couple different things over my mid to early career, both professionally and in my academic work, that kind of sparked this. So everything that we read in class really focused on the challenge that students were facing with loan and debt defaults. So I was really interested early on about debt and debt default rates. And then one day a young woman came into my colleague's office and said that she was having trouble paying her graduate tuition because she was repaying her undergraduate debt to her parents. They borrowed on behalf of her to go to undergrad, and that was the Parent Plus loan. So I decided to do a study on Parent Plus loans from that conversation. But then access to higher education, the number of counselors that exist in the workforce, the sheer volume of students that counselors were working with, the national average was more than 600 to 1 in public schools, at smaller private schools. But you still at the high school level today have 230 plus student to 1 student to counselor ratio. And that is just exorbitant workload for those counselors to have real impact on students. And so we started to think about what we could do. And so if you could give students and parents access to data that they could really be well informed, would that augment what counselors can do? Do you bypass having to go hire a private counselor? A number of different ways to help solve this kind of pipeline from high school to college. So, that's kind of where what we try to do and where we've landed.
Yeah, brilliant. And in terms of building out the product, how does it look today versus your first MVP?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Early on, when we started to build, it was a little bit rough. One of our early mentors and advisors for me, he said, what you ship first is always crap. So just ship it and get feedback and talk to people. And it looks much better today. We've iterated a number of times. We're iterating and building every week, talking to students and parents along the way. And it's in very good shape. We actually presented it at a conference 2 weeks ago now, and everybody thought we're on a really great track. So that was great feedback and very rewarding.
Yeah, pleased to hear that. And in terms of the learning curve that you've gone through so far, what's been the biggest "oh no" moment that you've had, and how did you go about handling that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We haven't had any big "oh no" moments. I think we've had some hiccups. If I wasn't a first-time founder, I would have done certain things differently. And so who you talk to, who's your first lawyer, who's your first bank, who's your first back end tech team, all of that. You wanted to get to work, and I'm trying to build something that's going to be here 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And so I think slow and steady making, strong decisions is important, but also having to get things in place and starting to work. So balancing those two, making good, strong decisions from the beginning is important to me. We haven't had huge hiccups, crashes with the product. So that's been really good. So hopefully that continues, and hopefully we don't have any major things that take our attention away from what we're really trying to do, is build a great product for students and parents.
Yeah. Cool. And then as the first time founder, what's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew before you set up the business?
One thing is I would definitely set up a C Corp or an S Corp from the beginning, depending on what you're trying to set up, versus an LLC, especially if you think that this is going to be some corporate entity that you work with a long period of time. We paid a bunch of lawyer fees that we felt like we wouldn't have had to pay if we made that decision differently in the beginning. Not the end of the world, but I would have started that clock earlier on being a corporation. We reincorporated this, at the beginning of this year. And make sure you're hiring really well at the beginning. We have, but I think that just is an important reiteration of any founder, that you're hiring and taking that very specific and diligent time to do that. We've had people reach out to us who want to work for us as we're having conversations, and as we're furthering conversations on social media. People reach out and say, hey, I want to work with you, and just taking that time, investing that time to meet with them. And then if it doesn't work, just wait. Slow and steady, I think, on that as we scale.
Yeah. And staying on hiring, what's been the most difficult role that you've had to hire for so far, and why was that?
I don't know if it was difficult, but it was important. Our developer was the most important person that we've hired. He's been absolutely fabulous, and we were lucky. It was a relationship that we had through another person, and the relationship has been fabulous. But I think absent that, we would not be where we are today. And that position, particularly, every position, the first 100 positions early on, is really just trust and commitment to mission. And he has been that 100%, and really understanding our vision and what we want to build. And that's of paramount importance.
Yeah. Well, good to hear that's worked out so well. And then for you personally, if when you are hiring, when you are speaking to potential candidates, what do you, or how do you look for that kind of startup DNA when going through that process?
Sure. So I think that people really have to have a hunger to be independent and come with ideas on their own, work on their own. We had somebody who wanted to do some marketing work for us. I said, show me a portfolio. She had an extensive portfolio, stuff that she had done on her own, as a young professional, before one would expect her to have such an extensive portfolio. So really something that you're driving yourself to learn on your own and build. I think in life, you generally want to be able to point to something that you've committed to a long period of time, whether that's a relationship or a company or a job, and say, what have I built? Whether it's a family or, again, a product or a company. And so if you can see something that someone has built, even as a young professional, 2, 3, 4 years, they have a nice portfolio of work, you can see that DNA is in them, that they're willing to commit to something.
Yeah. Okay. And as somebody that's going through this entrepreneurial journey for the first time, how do you feel the Boston startup community can better support founders like yourself?
I've found the Boston community very welcoming. Startup Boston is a great nonprofit here in Boston that is trying to kind of aggregate all of the startup activities. And they have a startup week, which I took part in early September. That was really wonderful. But universities here have a great kind of history of startup. MIT, Northeastern particularly. We were at Suffolk University for Boston Startup Week. So a number of different opportunities for students to get involved in startups. I know that young professionals are working to try and have a new kind of landing place, Build 617. I'd be happy to be a part of that, as it gets launched and off the ground. I think Boston's a very collaborative and welcoming city. And so, any way that people can share ideas, share talent, share resources, it's a great opportunity to just kind of get together. So any way that more founders can get together in a room, network, communicate, share ideas, share resources, best what I'll call back end services, whether that's on the HR or finance side, legal side, non-product facing side. All of that is just helpful because as you're trying to build a product, you don't want to have to deal with headaches related to anything that's non-customer facing.
Yeah, the more the better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. And reflecting, what's the best piece of advice you've had from someone else? Could be another founder, investor, advisor, that you'd kind of pass on to others?
I've received a lot of advice. So it, and some of it is good and some of it you kind of take and use it as a chip on your shoulder. I think hiring is really important and take your time with that. That's always been important. Don't die is another one. Just keep at it, keep working. Make sure you have enough money to get through the next whatever period of time you're running on, and figure out how to get to the next month, next 6 months. Continue to build relationships before you need them. It's interesting how, I'm not a young professional with startup. I'm an older professional with a startup. I was lucky enough to be successful in other ways that has allowed me to do this. And so I built a network over time. And then when you call upon that network to help you out with some part of your new business, it has been interesting who's been supportive and who's been, less supportive. And, it's surprising when those relationships aren't there when you thought they might be, in both directions, right? Both positively and challenging in that regard. So I think that is always a piece of advice, that your network is important, but you'll be surprised at what that network delivers when you call upon it.
Yep. Okay. And having moved into the volatility of startup life, how do you personally deal with the highs and the lows that ultimately come with that journey?
Yeah, I just try and keep level-headed. Work out, eat healthy, read, just keep myself in general positive mindset. I have a very positive co-founder. I have two co-founders, but one of them is exceptional. They're both positive, but one is exceptionally positive, and this is his fourth startup. And so it is helpful to have someone who's overly optimistic, because I need to be sometimes more realistic. How are we doing today? What are the metrics? What's going on a day-to-day basis? And having people who are positive, whether it's just significant other, siblings, family, children, all of that is important in startup life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, look, thanks very much, Chris, for joining today. I think the problem that you guys are trying to solve is fantastic. So, best of luck to yourself and Irnerius moving forward, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.